Libraries are wonderful places, although I sometimes think that they are forgotten these days with the vast amounts of information at our fingertips on the internet, and the fact that we can pretty much download every book on the New York Times bestseller list in less than a minute. But there's something about holding a book in your hand, or being surrounded by them, whether in a bookstore or a library, that's comforting. And if you're a book lover, you know what I mean. What I really find fascinating are those books you'll never find as an ebook. Those long-forgotten ancient tomes of the past that sit on dusty shelves and whose authors we no longer remember. Those who poured their heart and soul into their work in the hopes that someone, either then or years later, would appreciate the effort. For the monks and nuns at Mont Saint Odile Abbey in France, old books were a treasure to be cherished. They had an entire library filled with books that were centuries old. And in the year 2000, those books began to disappear. It seems the Abbey had a strange encounter with a phantom. The Abbey at Mont Saint Odile was first built in the year 690. A few centuries later, it burned down, only to be rebuilt again in 1661. For a little over a century, it's been a convent. It's also been the home of a very unique library. The library there contains ancient works by thinkers like Aristotle and Homer. There are also books that were printed before 1501. These are called incunabula. And, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, they are very rare and priceless. The library boasted 10 of these, some of which were Bibles. There were other Bibles, also centuries old, and it's safe to say that of the thousands of books that the library boasted, the Bibles were the most precious. On a warm summer's day in August of 2000, one of these ancient Bibles, one that was over 500 years old, went missing. It wasn't only the Bible that went missing on that day. Other books had as well, and the one that caught the attention of the caretakers was one of the incunabulum. Its dusty bare spot on the shelf taunted them. Now, how could this have happened? Thousands, if not millions of people visit the Abbey every year, but it's not like the books in the ancient library are there to be checked out. These are kept behind locked doors. Had the door been left unlocked? At the time of the theft, there were a number of employees at the Abbey who had access to the library, but these were trustworthy people. Perhaps a guest of the Abbey had simply picked it up and walked away with it by accident? Well, some accident. All they could do at this point was pray that it turned up. The summer months gave way to autumn and life went on. The missing book, while not quite forgotten, was lamented as a singular tragedy and one that wouldn't be repeated. And it wasn't. Not until November. That is when the remaining 9 incunabula disappeared. As one can imagine, the Abbey was in an uproar. And to make matters worse, the security cameras had decided not to work on the day the 9 priceless books went missing. These were prized possessions and irreplaceable. The Abbey staff and the authorities who were brought in to investigate had no clues and nothing to go on. The book thief had gotten away with it. Now, what would you do when presented with a thief who enjoyed old books? You'd make sure the door was locked, right? They did. They even changed the locks. The locks were heavier now and more durable. Not unbreakable, but sufficient enough to protect the library's remaining treasures and deter a few book thieves. Now it seems the new locks did the trick. Whomever had stolen the books seems to have been thwarted. Thwarted, that is, until April of 2002. It was a normal spring day when a caretaker unlocked and entered the library expecting nothing more than to go about her usual morning routine. What she hadn't expected was the empty shelves which greeted her. The phantom book thief hadn't been content with only 1 or 2 valuable books to pilfer. This time the phantom claimed hundreds of books as its own. Rumors spread. There could be no mistaking it. It had to be a phantom. The doors had remained locked and there were no other signs of entry. A search of the abbey found everything else in order. Nothing else was missing. The thief only cared about books and had somehow made them seemingly vanish into thin air. It's not like someone could just walk in and grab a few hundred books, too, without being noticed. Now the authorities were adamant. There had to be a reasonable explanation. The world wasn't full of ghosts and phantoms, especially not those with a penchant for old books. Perhaps a ghost could pass through walls, but books couldn't. No, there had to be something else going on here. So they searched. And then they found it. Not the phantom. They found a secret passageway behind the library's wall. The phantom wasn't a phantom. He was clever, they gave him that, but he was just as real as you and I. So they set up a trap and waited for their phantom to return. And return he did, the very next night. I want to pause right here to say something about secret passageways. They're really cool, aren't they? There's something about old castles and old monasteries that practically beg for there to be a secret passage or a hidden room somewhere behind a wall or two. And they were used for all sorts of things. To spy on others is the most obvious reason, although how creepy is that? They were also used to hide in order to avoid speaking to someone you didn't want to speak to, or even to escape an invading force back when invading forces were a thing. Now, this secret passage, the one the phantom book thief used, had probably been built there for the monks to hide in. From what? I have no idea, but that notion, monks hiding in walls, has its own set of spooky thoughts. So back to the phantom and the trap set for it by the authorities. The trap was simple. It was a video camera. So the police set it up and waited. And just as expected, their phantom made his appearance. His name was Stanislas Coste. They had their phantom, or a 32-year-old teacher from Strasbourg, who, it appears, did it only for the love of books. Now, the story of missing books might end there, but that's only part of it, and that's not the most fascinating part. What is fascinating is how Coste pulled it off. How did a 32-year-old teacher who'd never been in trouble before come to pull off a mysterious theft involving secret passages and ancient books that had left authorities baffled for over 2 years? Patience and, as I said, a love of books. Now, Coste was no stranger to the Abbey. He'd been there as a child and had fallen in love with the place. He was Catholic and had even been taught the catechism by the man who would later become the head of the Abbey at the time when Stanislas had stolen most of those books. So why? How do you go from a frequent visitor to a book thief? A book thief who stole ancient Bibles, no less. It was simple. Because he could. He had not meant to do it. That fateful day in August of 2000 when Coste stole his first book, that ancient incunabula, he'd been doing what he'd done many times before, visiting. Only this time, the library door was unlocked and he wandered in. Because he loved old books, especially ancient books and Bibles, he felt that they were being done a disservice. The ones he saw were dusty and in need of care, so he took a few. When he realized what he'd had and that there were more like it, he went back a few months later, found the door unlocked again, and took a few more. Now, what did he do with them? Well, he read them. He knew Latin, and he was able to decipher the old text. He even lovingly placed his own handcrafted label over the monastery's label. He wanted to build a library of ancient texts, all his own. It didn't matter to him where they came from. To him, who could place ownership on something so old and seemingly uncared for? At least in his care, they wouldn't be ignored. When he went back a third time, he found those new locks, the ones that were durable and heavy. Now, Coste wasn't a professional by any means, so he tried a hand drill. Now, he didn't have any luck with that, so he needed to find some other way to save those precious books from obscurity. And then he found it. An old article that had been written about the Abbey which made mention of a secret passageway behind the wall. Now he just needed to get there, so he did a little bit more research. And this next part is impressive and straight out of a movie. On the night of May 19th, 2002, Stanislas Coste snuck into the Abbey and made his way to the bell tower. From there, he used a rope ladder to descend through a trap door. That trap door led to a small room connected to the secret passageway. As he made his way through the passageway, near the floor, he found a couple of panels that he could slide aside and slip through a bookshelf into the library. 8 trips later, all done that same night, and he came away with suitcases full of books. So how many in total did he slip out of the library? All said, between 1,100 and 1,400 ancient and priceless books. After 2 years, the phantom book thief had been stopped. So what did he have to say? He said this: "I'm afraid my burning passion overrode my conscience. It may appear selfish, but I felt the books had been abandoned. They were covered with dust and pigeon droppings, and I felt no one consulted them anymore. There was also the thrill of adventure. I was very scared of being found out." And what became of Stanislaus Coste? Did he end up in prison? Did he lose his teaching job? No, neither of these things happened. Coste was able to keep his job and was given a suspended sentence. In the end, the books were all returned, and Stanislaus Coste resumed his normal life. And the phantom? Well, the phantom still watches over the books. From afar. Thank you for listening. I'm Rick Coste, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and leave a review. You can also help support the show by going to strangeencounters.org. I would love to hear from you. I would also love to hear your suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, please take care of yourself. It's a strange world out there.
After my should see, save, making shown I'm visualization of it.